I think perhaps we sort of try and come to some sort of conclusions. I think it's a rich and complicated problem. And anybody that says this is the right thing to do is probably speaking only for a small group of people, but completely different things can be appropriate in different situations. I think for some situations, using Word is the right thing to do. And in another situation, getting a sighted assistant is the right thing to do. And certainly people have to make their own judgments about things. I'd like the tech community to have a good discussion about this problem, the problem of accessibility, and also the implications of the next 30 years. I don't think we can bumble along and think, well, in 5 years' time, perhaps we can make a decision about this. We're sort of making decisions by not doing anything. And the LaTeX team have made a big initiative to rewrite large parts of the core of LaTeX so that their preferred solution can work. And I can see why they're doing it, but from my point of view, and I'm an advocate of using tech as a callable function, for example, there's a lot of, what's the word? LaTeX is in some sense a 20th century technology, and we're in an entirely different situation now. So having discussion about this sort of thing, I think would be very helpful for the tech community. And involving the people who are blind and visually impaired, I think is really very, very important. And we're doing them and ourselves a disservice if we don't do that and encourage that and take advantage of it when it's possible. So my conclusion from this is that the development of a community of practice that deals with accessibility in particular is something that's really quite important for us. And put technically right to one side, the community of practice is really important. What's the word? They say in business that communication skills are really important. And a community of practice is a community that communicates with itself. And getting the right people to talk with each other is a very important thing to do. And I hope we've made a start here on this. And I'm very interested in the problems that Sean, before we started recording, talked about the pressures at his institution, and I'm sure a lot of other institutions have similar pressures to put everything online and make it accessible. I think the pandemic has accelerated a lot of changes or precipitated a lot of changes that were about to take place, and it's become the occasion for them. And certainly online research seminars are something I'm well aware of. So there's a window of opportunity here, and I'd like us to be taking it. Those are my closing words. And everybody else is entitled to make their closing remarks, or even ask a naive question.
Well, I won't ask another naive question just yet, but one of the things my university has done is purchase a product, and I can't remember what its name is now without going online. Well, I'm online, but going to the intranet and finding it out. But we have a product that essentially scores our file uploads to our virtual learning environments. So it essentially scans the documents, the PDF files, and will give them a score for accessibility. And most of my LaTeX generated ones are coming out at something like 5%. I don't actually produce any Microsoft generated ones, so I maybe ought to try that. But that does mean that at some stage they'll start looking at that and they will start to think, well, why are all these techie people getting such low scores, whereas the School of Management people are getting really high scores? See, that is something that will come round to us shortly, and that there will be more of a microscope turned on us, I think. I'm assuming School of Management people use Microsoft, of course.
The Tech Hour has a monthly cycle, and this is the second Thursday of the month. So next month, we'll have another accessibility meeting. And if you drop me an email, Sean, we can try and make the sort of problems you have part of the focus of the meeting. I think that would help balance things quite well, because today has been a rather long-term thing. And this practical problem of meeting accessibility targets, for example, is something that more people should be aware of. And I see Nelson nodding his head. Perhaps he can make it on this.
Well, I'm relieved that my institution has not yet raised the accessibility issue, because some of it would fall on my shoulders to deal with. But I fully agree that this is the thing we have to be thinking fairly seriously of for the future. And as has been pointed out by participants in the office hour over the last several months, that HTML for people with either hearing impairments or visual impairments often is a better solution for document access than an image of a typeset page. On the other hand, we mustn't forget the original audience either, because books have been tradition for more than 500 years in human society, and students still study for their courses primarily from printed textbooks rather than from electronic versions, although in some courses they can buy the electronic versions. So I think we have to maintain what we've been doing with beautifully typeset documents, which is what Don Knuth asked us to go out and produce. But we also have to think that there are alternate presentation forms that could be the end of this. And to the extent that software in between the human writer and the human reader can make that translation fairly painless, I think that's has a lot of hope for the future, because I don't think that individual solutions that people come up with to deal with their particular problem are ever going to see wide applicability. It really has to be in the back-end machinery. And just as an example of the kind of thing that has happened, when Unicode was introduced in the early 1990s, it was recognized that character sets needed support for a much larger glyph repertoire. Chinese, for example, has of the order of 100,000 known historical characters. Later it became understood that there are other writing systems that have complicated requirements for typography. Some of the Indian subcontinent languages reorder letters differently from their input form. Arabic typesetting tradition for religious texts is that you stretch characters, not spaces, in order to make right justified lines. And for the Quran, you must end every page with a complete line. And so this leads to not only a line by line problem, but a page by page problem that is extremely challenging. Tech can deal with this, fortunately, but what has happened in the industry then is that there are three major libraries, one from Microsoft, one from Apple, and one from IBM, that take a Unicode string, typically a word, and return a representation of that that tells how it should be typeset. So if the input string is A, B, C, D, E, but the displayed form is E, A, B, C, D, the Unicode layer would return that reordered string, and the typesetting engine wouldn't have to deal with it. It only deals with words at a time. Now, of course, this still leaves the problem of what happens when you have to break a word at a line boundary for hyphenation. And I'm not sure exactly what approach the Unicode engines have used to deal with that. That's a topic to be investigated.
I just remember Knuth saying that the hyphenation, there was 7 layers, and that was the hardest bit of coding he did for the tech, and that if he ever wanted to ask for reimbursement for his efforts, that's the one part he would ask for. So I don't know how other software does hyphenation, why it's so difficult. I don't even know why it's so difficult, actually, but I take his word for it. And having solved that problem, I mean, is it then easily transported to other software, HTML and so on?
Yeah, the tech hyphenation algorithm actually has been used in some other systems. And last year, the IEEE Annals of the History of Computing journal published several issues with articles by pioneers in the desktop publishing industry. And one of the things that comes out of reading those is the view in the 1980s that the big problem facing computerized typesetting was hyphenation and justification. They called it the H&J problem. And it was a competitive feature of their software offerings to garner customers from other companies. Today, we hardly think about the problem because tech does such a marvelous job of it. But it really was a challenging problem in those days. Mm-hmm. And if humans had adopted the practice that hyphenation was done simply by putting an underscore or other magical character anywhere in a word that reached the end of a line, we'd have become accustomed to reading it and hyphenation would not be a problem. But instead, we have rather peculiar rules about how hyphenation should happen, so that in Britain and in America, we don't agree on how words are hyphenated. So we have to have different hyphenation patterns loaded if we want to conform to local social and linguistic norms.